Welcome to High Infidelity, the best cheating videos on YouTube. If you enjoy this content, remember to subscribe and turn on notifications. Now let's get into the video.
Found my husband and little sister in bed together. My wife, a 22-year-old girl, and I enjoyed what I considered to be the most amazing, healthy, and happy marriage imaginable. We've been together for just more than 2 years, but we've known each other for 7 years before to that. We met for the first time in high school, but I've never been in a relationship. I have a son whose biological father is a deadbeat. I am the mother of this child. My spouse took over as his father when he was 4 months old and has been doing so ever since. My husband is admired by my children and relatives. He reminds everyone of my father, who died unexpectedly of a heart attack 4 years ago. On the floor of our living room, to be precise. In a very short amount of time, my family and my husband became pretty close. Just a few months after we started dating, my husband and I decided to start trying for a child. However, we did not get pregnant with our child until 15 months after starting our attempts. It was quite tough for me to deal with infertility, since it affected my mental health. After the 8th negative pregnancy test in a row, I spent a significant amount of time sobbing into my husband's shoulder. We were ecstatic when we discovered that I was expecting our second son in November of last year. When the worldwide situation unfolded, it put a damper on my expected motherhood. My younger sister, 18F, came to our flat often to keep me company as my husband worked long hours as a consequence of the international economic crisis. Our family is pretty tight, but my youngest sister, who is the youngest of our 4 siblings, and I are by far the closest of all of our siblings. After my mother abandoned us 2 months after our father's death to go live with her boyfriend, I took up the role of primary caregiver for her. However, we did not get pregnant with our child until 15 months after starting our attempts. It was quite tough for me to deal with infertility, since it affected my mental health. After the 8th negative pregnancy test in a row, I spent a significant amount of time sobbing into my husband's shoulder. We were ecstatic when we discovered that I was expecting our second son in November of last year. When the worldwide situation unfolded, it put a damper on my expected motherhood. My younger sister, 18F, came to our flat often to keep me company as my husband worked long hours as a consequence of the international economic crisis. Our family is pretty tight, but my youngest sister, who is the youngest of our 4 siblings, and I are by far the closest of all of our siblings. After my mother abandoned us 2 months after our father's death to go live with her boyfriend, I took up the role of primary caregiver for her. Would do anything for her at the drop of a hat, and she could always count on him to defend her and stand by her during a Saturday in April. My husband decided to take it easy and have a drink for the first time in more than a year. In preparation for my younger sister's arrival, I went out and got a bottle of wine for them to share so that they could have a good night of drinking together, because I was pregnant and couldn't drink with him. As the rest of the group was playing video games and watching movies, I retired to my room since it had become late and I was fatigued. My partner was still playing video games when I awakened at 1 a.m. and I walked up to see whether he was still in bed next to me. He wasn't. Putting on my glasses was not even a consideration for me. When I walked into the living room, I observed him standing leaned over her, while she was reclining on the couch, despite the fact that my vision was significantly impaired. Even though they were both clothed, I was feeling very apprehensive and sick to my stomach. When I inquired as to what they were doing, my husband said that he was having a conversation with her. The next time I went to the toilet, I burst into tears, but I disregarded it as dumb and hormonal, and I forced it to go into the background of my thoughts. Just couldn't, because the remembrance was taking over every thought in my head and driving me insane. Given the lack of proof and the lack of seeing of them doing anything, I just told myself that I was insane and that they would never do such a thing to me, especially given the fact I was considerably pregnant. My partner started to become more distant and sometimes unpleasant towards me. He always seems to be able to find something to disagree with me. I'm not receiving any attention, affection, or at this point in time. It was a complete departure from his usual demeanor. My first reaction was to dismiss it as his being worried about the new baby. After my husband and I closed on our first home in May, I set out to paint all of the rooms in the house before we moved in. My husband consented and my sister promised to help him out with the arrangements. Fast forward to July. After 3 months of having the distinct impression that something wasn't quite right and that my marriage was in danger of failing. In the middle of the night, 9 months pregnant, I awakened to an empty bed and no trace of my husband. It was my younger sister who had accompanied me to the party. The next morning, I put on my glasses and strolled into the living room to see whether he was up and playing with the new cat that we had just gotten the day before. My stomach dropped as I realized there was no sign of him. There was no one in the room where my younger sister was sleeping, but the door to my unborn child's nursery was open. My pulse rate dropped and my feet felt like they were made of concrete, yet I started walking gently towards the chamber. But instead, I found my husband on his knees in the nursery of our unborn son, delivering oral to my younger sister. Those were the first words that came out of my mouth. I knew it. Get out of my house. I'll never forget the looks on their faces when I saw them. I was in a condition of shock and dread. I rushed to our master bathroom, where I just stood there, speechless. The moment my husband went through the door and tried to communicate with me, I threw everything I could find in his path and told him to leave me alone. I moved past him because he didn't move past me. The rest of it is a blur to me, and I don't remember much of what happened. Except for keeping his keys hidden so he could take her back to my mother's house, she was completely uninterested. He ended up doing so anyways. However, despite my embarrassment and humiliation, I can't bring myself to leave him, no matter how disgusted, heartbroken, and sad I am at the moment. After my sister's behavior against me, I'd only talked with her a few of times, trying to figure out how in the world she could do such a thing to me of all people. When they couldn't come up with a satisfactory response, they had almost every time she came over while I was asleep. A romantic connection with my sister is neither a goal nor a need for me. Her commitment to me beyond that of everyone else on the face of the planet, in my opinion. How am I supposed to recover from the ultimate betrayal by the two people who mean the most to me? Edit. Just to make sure there aren't any misconceptions, my husband did not groom her or exploit her in any way. She has said that she did it fully on her own initiative. She and my spouse both said that there were no romantic overtones to the situation. It's all about the in this situation. It's also worth mentioning that my younger sister has a lengthy history of sleeping with older men, but I never expected she'd go so far as to have a relationship with my spouse. By mentioning this, I'm not relieving him of any of the burden he is under. An adult male, 27, is now in prison for having relations with a minor, 15 years old, in the back of his car when she was 15 years old. In addition, the dude's name was the same as our older brother's. She just has big difficulties, as we all have. I found out she'd been using my when I was at work a few years back and was furious. She's nuts, and she has issues with limits, clearly creeped me out, so I tossed them away. But once again, I was completely unaware that she would seek to destabilize my marriage or our relationship. Also, she has a very special place in the heart of my son. I'm not sure why she would want to take the chance of ruining it. To be quite honest, I'm baffled. Story 2. Being a cheater messes you up emotionally. To cut a long tale short, we split up amicably because I need to relocate. For a year, we spoke and texted every day. I take a step back, and he becomes distant. But we do get together on occasion, then he disappears, and I keep him at bay everywhere. I was still in love with him, and I never allowed myself to mourn the end of our relationship. So, 1 year later, I'm still feeling it. I received an email from him requesting me to call him. I discovered I had FB interactions with him, and he stated he sent a letter. We chat once more. We intend to meet, and I ask whether he's ever slept with anybody. I later discovered that he had a rebound female after I left, and that they are still together. He feels stifled by the relationship, but has no intentions to quit it. He claims that his work wants to transfer him to the United States to live, but he doesn't want to. So being in a relationship means he won't be sent, but if he marries her, they would send both of them. I suppose it's probably BS. He claims he never found the proper moment to ask me, perhaps when I came and asked if there was a possibility we might get back together. His response, okay, we'll see what happens. The point is, he wants to continue being friends, and it breaks my heart to see this. He was my last. I haven't met anybody else because I simply don't have it in me. I'm still mourning what we had, my idea of what may have been. As an emotional masochist, I opted to be his buddy since the list is too extensive. But I know it won't last since I'm going to join the Navy and leave this town, this time with no regrets because I'm leaving a loved one behind. What's the big deal, guys? I confronted him and asked him when he realized he no longer loved me. His response, I still love you, but you had to go, and I needed an anchor. Now I'm being remote. All I want is I've set the condition of no personal questions being asked, and he's set the condition of no arguing. I know it's all terrible, and this may not be the greatest method to obtain complete closure, but I'll get closure on a few things. I realize how pitiful this must seem. As a result of this, I've concluded that my generation now stinks. We're not faithful, we're not loyal, and we don't believe in waiting. I've given up on finding love, on finding a companion with whom to create a future. I'm exhausted and done.